It was November 14th, 1966, and the Houston Astrodome was buzzing with an electric energy that seemed to vibrate through every steel beam of the massive structure. Muhammad Ali, the 24-year-old heavyweight champion of the world, was about to defend his title against Cleveland Williams, a 33-year-old fighter nicknamed Big Cat for his fierce demeanor and devastating power that once made him one of the most feared men in the heavyweight division. The Astrodome, America's first domed stadium and the so-called eighth wonder of the world, had been transformed into a gladiatorial arena. 35,460 spectators had packed the venue, creating what was then the largest indoor crowd ever to witness a heavyweight championship fight. The gross gate receipts totaled $461,290, a staggering sum for the time. Before we continue, I need to ask you something. This channel only exists because of you. You are important to me. I know you appreciate stories told with soul. If you feel something real just from this beginning, subscribe now. Seriously, it costs you nothing but means everything to me, who creates each story with love. Harry Kessler, the designated referee for the bout, stood in the ring adjusting his crisp white shirt and black bow tie with trembling hands. At 58 years old, Kessler had officiated hundreds of professional fights throughout his career, from dingy small-town arenas to the bright lights of major venues. But something about this evening felt different, charged with an emotional weight he couldn't quite identify. The referee had grown up during the Great Depression in Philadelphia, where he learned early that life could be brutal and unforgiving. Boxing had been his escape, first as an amateur fighter, then as a trainer, and finally as one of the most respected officials in the sport. He'd seen men broken in the ring, careers ended with a single punch, dreams shattered in moments. Yet, somehow he'd maintained his faith in the noble aspects of the sweet science. Cleveland Williams entered the ring carrying far more than just his 112 pounds and 6 ounces of fighting weight. 2 years earlier, on November 29th, 1964, his life had changed forever. A Texas highway patrolman's .357 Magnum bullet had torn through his abdomen during a traffic stop that went horribly wrong. The bullet had traveled across his intestines and lodged near his spine, doing immense damage to his colon and internal organs. That Williams was even alive, let alone fighting for the heavyweight championship, was a medical miracle. Doctors had given him less than a 10% chance of survival that night in the emergency room. He'd spent months learning to walk again, battling infections that nearly claimed his life multiple times. The bullet remained lodged in his body, too dangerous to remove. It had become a permanent part of him, a constant reminder of mortality that made every step into the ring an act of extraordinary courage. Williams had been one of boxing's rising stars before the shooting. His record stood at 65 wins against only 6 losses, with 51 knockouts, 15 of them coming in the first round. He was known for his devastating right hand and iron chin, having never been stopped by any opponent. But the bullet had stolen more than just his perfect health. It had robbed him of the explosiveness that made him special, leaving him a shadow of his former self. Muhammad Ali bounced on his toes in the opposite corner, shadow boxing with the fluid grace that had earned him admiration from boxing purists and casual fans alike. His movements were poetry in motion, each feint and jab executed with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. But those closest to him, Angelo Dundee, his trainer and father figure, and Bundini Brown, his colorful assistant trainer and cheerleader, noticed something different about the champion's pre-fight demeanor. The usual verbal pyrotechnics that accompanied Ali's pre-fight rituals were notably subdued. Where normally he would be sharing his predictions with reporters, taunting his opponent, or entertaining the crowd with improvised rhymes, tonight he seemed introspective, almost melancholic. He'd spent the previous evening reading about Williams' background, learning about the shooting, understanding what his opponent had endured just to make it to this night. The opening bell clanged at 9:47 p.m. Central Time, and Ali immediately established his dominance with a display of movement that seemed to defy the laws of physics. His famous shuffle, a quick step in place that would confuse opponents and dazzle audiences, was on full display from the opening seconds. He moved like a middleweight trapped in a heavyweight's body, his feet barely seeming to touch the canvas. As he glided around the ring, Ali's jabs snapped out with metronome-like precision, finding their mark on Williams' face with mathematical accuracy. Each punch was measured, controlled, designed not just to score points, but to demonstrate the vast gap in speed and reflexes between the two men. The champion's left hand flickered out like a serpent's tongue, tagging Williams whenever he attempted to move forward. Harry Kessler watched in professional fascination and growing concern as the fight unfolded. In his 5 decades around boxing rings, he had officiated some of the sport's greatest champions: Rocky Marciano's final fights, Sugar Ray Robinson in his prime, Floyd Patterson's championship bouts, but he had never seen anything quite like what Muhammad Ali was displaying this night. Like watching a master artist paint on canvas, Kessler would later write in his unpublished memoir. Every movement was deliberate, every punch a brushstroke, creating a masterpiece of destruction. But there was something else there, something that I didn't recognize at first. It was restraint. Ali could have ended it at any moment, but he was holding back. Cleveland Williams, to his everlasting credit, refused to yield to the inevitable. Despite the physical limitations imposed by his injury, the big cat pressed forward with the determination of a man who understood this might be his only chance at boxing immortality. His left eye had begun to swell from Ali's systematic targeting, and blood started trickling from his nose, creating crimson streams that caught the arena's blazing overhead lights. Williams' corner, led by his manager Jack Kearns, who had once guided Jack Dempsey to championship glory, shouted encouragement that seemed to echo hollowly in the vast space of the Astrodome. They knew, as did everyone at ringside, that their fighter was outgunned. But Williams had come too far, survived too much, to quit now. The first round ended with Ali clearly ahead, but the margin of victory seemed somehow incomplete. He had landed numerous clean shots, displayed superior footwork, and demonstrated his famous hand speed. Yet there was an unfinished quality to his work, as if he were painting a portrait and had stopped before adding the final, decisive brushstrokes. In the second round, the inevitable avalanche began. Williams, pressured by the realization that he needed to take risks to have any chance of victory, began to press forward more aggressively. It was exactly what Ali had been waiting for. As Williams charged in, throwing a wild left hook, he walked directly into a perfectly timed right cross that sent him crashing to the canvas for the first time in his professional career. The crowd erupted as Williams hit the deck, but Ali's reaction was notably subdued. Instead of celebrating, he moved to a neutral corner with an expression that seemed more concerned than triumphant. Kessler began his count, watching Williams struggle. To his feet at the count of 6, his legs visibly shaky beneath him. The big cat had barely regained his balance when Ali moved in again. This time, a rapid-fire combination, left jab, right cross, left hook, sent Williams down for the second time. The canvas seemed to welcome him back like an old friend, the taste of his own blood mixing with the familiar sensation of defeat. Again, Williams rose, this time more slowly, his eyes already beginning to glaze with the telltale signs of a fighter whose resources were rapidly depleting. The crowd was on its feet, sensing that they were witnessing something special. Not just a championship fight, but a demonstration of one man's remarkable superiority over another. Ali's third knockdown of Williams came via a perfectly executed 5-punch combination that Kessler would later describe as the most beautiful sequence of punches I ever saw thrown in anger. Williams went down hard, his legs betraying him completely. The bell rang just as Kessler reached the count of 8, saving Williams from what seemed like certain defeat. Williams' cornermen rushed into the ring like battlefield medics, using smelling salts and cold water in a desperate attempt to revive their fallen warrior. Williams's eyes were unfocused, his speech slurred. By all rights, his corner should have thrown in the towel, but Cleveland Williams hadn't survived a bullet to the gut to quit now. If this story has already made you feel something, no matter how small, don't leave without giving back. Comment and subscribe now. Each story here is made with care to touch people like you. Because what's coming next is even more powerful, and you'll want to be here when this story turns everything upside down. The third round opened with Williams emerging from his corner like a wounded animal backed into a corner. He came out swinging, with the fury of a man who understood that this might be his final moments as a professional fighter. Wild haymakers flew through the Houston air, missing their target by inches as Ali danced effortlessly out of harm's way. Ali's response was swift and surgical. A right hand dropped Williams for the 4th time, his legs folding beneath him like a building in controlled demolition. As the big cat struggled to his feet once more, something extraordinary happened that would resonate through boxing history for generations to come. Instead of moving in for the finish, the knockout blow that would punctuate his performance and silence any critics, Ali did something unprecedented. He stopped, completely stopped. The champion took a full step backwards, lowered his gloves, and pointed directly at Cleveland Williams. Not the pointing of a taunting victor, but the gesture of someone trying to communicate something profound. The crowd, which had been roaring throughout the fight, fell silent, as if someone had clicked off the volume on the entire Astrodome. Harry Kessler moved closer, unsure of what was unfolding before his experienced eyes. In all his years of officiating, he had never seen a fighter voluntarily pause during the heat of combat. Ali's lips were moving, speaking words that only Williams and Kessler, positioned between them, could hear clearly. "Brother," Ali said, his voice carrying across the space between them with surprising gentleness. "You've fought enough tonight. You've shown every person in this arena what real courage looks like. You don't have to prove anything more to anybody, especially not to yourself." Williams stood there, blood streaming down his face, mixing with the perspiration of exhaustion. His legs wobbled beneath him like a building in an earthquake, but somehow he remained upright. His eyes, nearly swollen shut from Ali's precise punishment, seemed to search the champion's face for any sign of deception or mockery. "I see the scar," Ali continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I see the bullet you carry inside you. I understand what it took just to get in this ring tonight. You didn't come here to get hurt more than you already have been. You came here to prove to yourself that you could still go the distance with the heavyweight champion of the world. Well, brother, you've already proven that." The referee, Harry Kessler, felt his chest tighten, emotions welling up that he couldn't control or explain. Later, in interviews given decades after that night, he would struggle to find words for what he witnessed. "It wasn't just two fighters anymore," he said in a 1994 documentary. "It was two human beings, recognizing each other's pain, each other's dreams. I've officiated hundreds of fights, but I've never seen anything like what happened." Next, Williams' corner team began shouting for him to continue, their voices a cacophony of desperation and false bravado. They knew their fighter was hurt, knew he was fighting a losing battle, but the lure of championship glory and the financial rewards that came with it clouded their judgment. Ali raised his hand toward Williams's corner, a gesture so commanding that it silenced their shouts immediately. The champion then turned his full attention back to his battered opponent, stepping close enough that their gloves nearly touched. "You got children, Cleveland?" Ali asked, though he already knew the answer. Williams had 3 young kids back in Houston, watching their father on television, holding their breath every time he fell. They're watching tonight, you know. They're seeing their daddy fight the champion of the world. They don't need to see him get hurt any more than he already has. You've already shown them what a warrior looks like. Williams' lower lip began to tremble, not from the physical punishment he'd absorbed, but from the emotional impact of Ali's words. Here was the man who had been systematically dismantling him for the better part of 3 rounds, showing him more kindness than he'd received. From many people in his own corner, the crowd remained silent, suspended in a moment that transcended sport. Even Howard Cosell, the renowned broadcaster known for his rapid-fire commentary, found himself speechless at ringside. Years later, Cosell would call it the most human moment I ever witnessed in any athletic competition. Referee Harry Kessler stepped between the 2 men, but not to separate them, to bear witness to something extraordinary. Tears were forming in the veteran official's eyes, a response he couldn't control or rationalize. This tough Philadelphia kid, who'd seen every form of violence the ring could offer, was crying at the display of compassion between 2 warriors. "You know what, Muhammad?" Williams said, his voice barely above a whisper, thick with emotion and exhaustion. "You could have knocked me out cold 3 times by now, but you didn't. That says more about you than any belt you'll ever wear." Williams nodded slowly, the fight finally leaving his battered body. The big cat had faced down bullets, and poverty, discrimination, and doubt, the demons of addiction, and the ghosts of missed opportunities. But facing genuine kindness from his opponent, that touched something deep inside him that mere physical violence never could reach. "Thank you, Muhammad," Williams whispered, his words barely audible even to those closest to them. "Not just for tonight, but for showing me that there's still some humanity left in this business." Ali's response was to wrap his arms around Williams in a brief but genuine embrace. It wasn't a showboat gesture or a publicity stunt. It was one human being acknowledging another's suffering and offering whatever comfort was possible in that moment. The champion then stepped back and turned to Kessler, giving a single definitive nod. The message was crystal clear. The fight was over. Harry Kessler's voice cracked as he waved off the contest, his usual professional composure crumbling in the face of what he'd just witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, tears flowing freely down his cheeks, "this fight is stopped. The winner by technical knockout at 1 minute and 8 seconds of the 3rd round, Muhammad Ali." But nobody moved to leave. The entire Astrodome seemed frozen in time, 35,000 people processing what they had just witnessed. This hadn't been just a boxing match. It had been a lesson in humanity, delivered by 2 men in the most unlikely of circumstances. The typical post-fight interviews became something entirely different. Howard Cosell, the normally eloquent broadcaster, stumbled through his recap, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. "Folks," Cosell said into his microphone, pausing frequently to compose himself, "I've covered countless fights over the years, from amateurs in Brooklyn to championship bouts in Madison Square Garden. But tonight Muhammad Ali showed us something that transcends sport entirely. He showed us what it truly means to be human, to have compassion for your fellow man, even in the midst of competition." Ali personally escorted Williams back to his corner, supporting the older fighter's weight as photographers captured the moment. The images that would appear in newspapers the next day could never fully convey the emotion of those moments, the gentleness with which Ali treated his defeated opponent, the respect evident in every gesture. In the days that followed, the fight would be remembered not solely for Ali's technical brilliance or Williams' warrior spirit, but for that extraordinary moment when competition transformed into compassion. Letters poured in from around the world. from children inspired by Ali's kindness, from veterans who saw parallels to their own struggles, from religious leaders who called it a moment of divine grace in an unlikely setting. Cleveland Williams never fought professionally again. His body, already pushed beyond its limits, simply couldn't take any more punishment. But years later, in interviews given long after the spotlight had faded, Williams would always return to that night in Houston. "Muhammad didn't just knock me down that night," Williams reflected in a 1985 interview with Sports Illustrated. "In a way, he lifted me up. He showed me that there was more to being a fighter than just throwing punches. Sometimes, knowing when to stop hitting is more powerful than landing the perfect punch." Harry Kessler continued refereeing for another decade after that night, working fights throughout America and even internationally. But he never forgot that November evening in the Houston Astrodome. When people asked him about the greatest fights he'd ever worked, he would always pause before answering. "People want me to talk about the biggest knockouts, the most dramatic finishes," he would tell friends and reporters. "But the greatest fight I ever officiated wasn't great because of what happened. It was great because of what didn't happen. That night, Muhammad Ali chose kindness over cruelty, humanity over brutality. That's when I learned that true champions aren't just measured by their victories, but by how they treat their opponents in defeat." The boxing world's response to the fight was complex and divided. Some critics accused Ali of grandstanding, of turning what should have been a straightforward professional contest into an unnecessary emotional spectacle. Sports writers debated whether Ali had shown weakness by not finishing Williams when he had the chance, but those who had been present that night, the fans in attendance, the broadcasters at ringside, the fighters and trainers who understood the pure courage required to step into the ring, they knew better. They had witnessed something that transcended the usual narratives of victory and defeat. Muhammad Ali's reputation was already legendary by 1966. He was the Olympic gold medalist who had shocked the world by defeating Sonny Liston, the controversial figure who had converted to Islam and changed his name, the outspoken athlete who was beginning to challenge not just opponents in the ring, but social conventions outside it. But that night in Houston, Ali transcended even his own considerable legend. He proved that true strength isn't just about knocking someone down. Sometimes it's about knowing when to help them stand back up. The technical statistics of the fight, Ali's 4 knockdowns of Williams, his 62% punch accuracy, Williams' courageous attempt to continue despite overwhelming odds, these would be recorded in boxing's record books. But the true legacy of that night couldn't be measured in numbers or statistics. What happened in those 7 minutes and 8 seconds of actual fighting time became a defining moment, not just in Ali's career, but in the history of sport itself. It was a reminder that behind every competitor, regardless of their skill level or success, is a human being deserving of dignity and respect. Boxing, often criticized as the most brutal of sports, had produced its most beautiful moment. In an arena designed for commerce and entertainment, 2 men had created something that spoke to the better angels of human nature. Today, when boxing historians and fans discuss the greatest moments in the sport's rich history, they often point to dramatic knockouts or stunning upsets, last-round comebacks, or displays of extraordinary courage. But those who truly understand what separates champions from mere winners know that sometimes the most powerful blow is the one that isn't thrown. The story of Muhammad Ali's fight with Cleveland Williams and what happened in those final seconds, when compassion replaced competition, continues to resonate decades later. It remains a shining example of what sport can be at its finest, not just a display of physical prowess, but a revelation of human character. In the end, Muhammad Ali's greatest victory that November night wasn't over Cleveland Williams as decisive As that was, his greatest victory was over the brutal indifference that so often characterizes professional combat sports. It was a victory for empathy, for understanding, for the radical idea that even in the midst of sanctioned violence, there's room for genuine human compassion. The fight lasted just over 7 minutes from opening bell to final whistle, but its impact, the reminder that dignity and respect can coexist with competition, that strength and compassion aren't mutually exclusive, that impact has endured for more than 50 years. And in a world that often seems defined by division and conflict, maybe that's exactly the kind of reminder we all need, that sometimes pointing towards someone in recognition of their courage and pain is more powerful than pointing a finger in blame or mockery. Sometimes the greatest champions are those who know when to extend a hand instead of a fist. If you made it this far and felt every word, won't you leave without subscribing? I tell these stories with my heart in my hands to reach people like you, who feel, who get emotional, who live. If this truly touched you, give back, comment, subscribe. Come be part of this family with me until the next video.